And all of a sudden, my visual field pivoted 90 degrees and I saw reality far, far in the distance. Again, it looked kind of like galaxies. And out of that reality, a beam of light came and hit me. And it absolutely shattered me. It was a more powerful light than even the diamond luminosity that had become my ultimate reality. 50 high dose sessions in, and just in that 1 second, it completely changed my understanding of reality.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you for being willing to hop on with me.
Glad to be here today, Luke.
Cool. Everyone, this is Christopher M. Bache. He's a PhD and professor emeritus in the Department of Philosophy and Religious Studies at Youngstown State University, where he taught for 33 years. An award-winning teacher and international speaker, Chris's work explores the philosophical implications of non-ordinary states of consciousness, especially psychedelic states. And today, we'll be primarily discussing ideas related to his book, LSD and the Mind of the Universe, his story of 20 years of his journey into the mind of the universe through 73 high-dose sessions of LSD. Welcome, Chris.
Thank you, Luke. It's good to be here with you.
Awesome. So I thought I'd start by just sort of tracing the path that a lot of people may explore with psychedelics. First being that the first encounter people may have, at least now, today, is they may encounter psychedelics for biohacking or for productivity, say with like microdosing. And then once they've experienced that, maybe they'll discover the therapeutic power of psychedelics. And then in those therapeutic journeys, maybe they'll discover that psychedelics are powerful tools for spiritual awakening. But there's a level even deeper than the level of spiritual awakening. And it's a path that you took. Could you tell us about that?
Well, that path I call cosmological exploration. And it's a path which clearly overlaps with the healing capacity of psychedelics and the spiritual awakening capacity, but it's different, I think. The spiritual awakening basically invites us to clean our consciousness, clean our system in a way that allows us to abide more comfortably and consistently in a transparent condition, transparent to what the Buddhists would call one's essential nature, one's Buddha nature, or other traditions would call one's divine nature. Cosmological exploration is different than that. It really is seeking to explore the deep structure of consciousness and the deep structure of the universe, to basically understand at a deeper philosophical level how reality works. Why are things the way they are? What are some of the deep structures of cosmic reality?
Awesome. And I'd love to ask you more in a bit about reality itself and those layers. But could you tell us a bit more just about what the path, the sort of protocol you followed and what that path looked like as you went along?
Yeah. Well, I was just out of graduate school back in ancient history in 1978, and I read Stan Grof's first book, Realms of the Human Unconscious, which had been published in 76. And immediately I recognized the significance of Stan's work for my discipline, which was philosophy of religion. I'm not a psychologist, not a therapist. I've never been particularly interested in the therapeutic applications as Stan has, but I'm really have been interested in its philosophical applications. So recognizing kind of a call, I began my work, which ended up lasting 20 years. I did 4 years of very intense work. I stopped for 6 years, and then I followed that with 10 years of very intense work. I chose to work with high doses of LSD, and by high doses, I worked at 500 to 600 micrograms. This is a regimen that I don't recommend today. I seriously don't recommend. And if I were doing it over again, I would do it differently. I would be much gentler, use lower doses and a wider distribution, a wider spectrum of psychedelics. But I chose to work with high doses of LSD for a couple of reasons. One, first LSD, that was the substance that Stan had done most of his research on, and I trusted that research. And again, this was 1978. So this is pre-ayahuasca, pre some of the early appreciation of organic and shamanic tradition, organic psychedelics used by shamanic traditions. And I worked with high doses because I was still thinking within a model of personal transformation or personal spiritual awakening. And the spiritual traditions basically taught that our karma is finite. And if I understood LSD psychotherapy as a process of cleaning up one's karma, so to speak, basically unearthing problematic material from one's personal unconscious and clearing that material, I thought by working with high doses, I could basically clear up my karma in a fewer number of sessions, essentially taking a bigger bite out of the apple in every session. Turns out that assumption was completely wrong, because the assumption that the human psyche, that this process was primarily focused on human transformation, was a mistake, or personal transformation. The collective dimensions of the psyche surfaced in my work very quickly on after just a couple of years. And the broader ramifications of entering into communion with the universe at large presented itself soon thereafter. So what I basically did, I worked in the therapeutic protocol, Stan's therapeutic protocol outlined in his book, LSD Psychotherapy, which means working in total isolation with a sitter, lying down, eye shades, headphones, carefully curated playlist of music, staying internalized all day long. I would work in the early morning through to evening, staying internalized in the session, and then making detailed records of my experiences the day after. So that was the protocol.
Got it. Awesome. And of course, reading the book, I know a little bit about where that went in the end. But I'm curious. So I know in another interview you mentioned that you had since partaken in psilocybin and ayahuasca journeys. And at one point in the book, you mentioned that one of the advantages of LSD being sort of a longer acting substance, around 8-hour journeys, that it kind of buffs the diamond more in that time, so to speak. I know there are other psychedelics that are now entering the potential use for people in society. And ibogaine is one substance that has a very long active time, about like 24 to 48 hours. And we could contrast that with like 5-MeO-DMT, which is an active period of like 15, 20 minutes, something like that. Would ibogaine potentially be a better contender for that reason, if not for cosmological exploration, but for spiritual awakening? And what might the protocol look like if you were to use something like 5-MeO-DMT?
Well, first of all, I've never used ibogaine, and so I'm not really qualified to speak to that in terms of comparing its function or values. Just looking at the window issue, there are other issues with psychedelics. Every psychedelic has a mind amplifying quality, but the texture or the nuance, the way it opens consciousness, the spectrum of consciousness that it opens us into varies from psychedelic to psychedelic. But just looking at the window, the reason I think the window is significant, and this is basically reflecting on people's experiences with DMT initially, which is a relatively short-acting psychedelic. And Rick Strassman, in his book, DMT, The Spirit Molecule, basically found that his clients were not really changed very deeply by having very significant DMT experiences. And in looking at his experiences and his data, comparing it to my data, I think what happens is, in order to explore the universe, you're using your small mind to explore big mind. You're using your individual personal consciousness to explore this vast field of consciousness. And when you have a long window, it gives more time for the large field to interact with the small field and do the cleansing and purification that's needed in order to have deep experiences of this cosmic reality. If you have only a very short-acting psychedelic, you don't have much time for the large consciousness to impact and be absorbed by the smaller consciousness, which means it has less of an activating effect, less of a transformative effect. There are other variables, of course, in the psychopharmacology of psychedelics, but just the window is, I think, an interesting variation. The short-acting psychedelics that have been like 5-MeO it's a remarkable psychedelic. It gives us quick access, if you use it in high doses, to very deep cosmic realities. But our time there is short. I don't have a lot of experience with 5-MeO, and I certainly don't work with it clinically with other people. I've talked with a number of therapists who work with 5-MeO at different levels of intensity for working with clients. I know it has remarkable transformative value, but I'm not really too comfortably comparing its transformative potential with the transformative potential of LSD, other than to make this simple relation between a time window and opportunity for transformation.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And one of the things that stood out about the book was how very not exaggerative, you know what I mean? Like it isn't, you don't necessarily go too far from the experience itself. And maybe that's your inclination as a philosopher and academic, but I really appreciate that. So,
I tried to just truly, it's a huge challenge, of course, to try to document or to present 20 years of such dramatic experiences. So the choice I made was really try to keep close to the phenomenology, keep close to the experiences, because the experiences were, to me, much more valuable than anything I would say about them, any interpretation I might offer, just the raw experiences themselves. Yeah.
Got it. So I got a question. Now, you don't recommend that people do what you did. And reading the book initially, I was feeling inspired. I was seeing your courage. I thought, wow, this is amazing. Maybe this is something I could explore. By the end, that sort of shifted. But overall, psychedelic use for spiritual awakening is basically inevitable at this point, at least for many people in society. So for someone who might use psychedelics for spiritual awakening and not necessarily cosmological exploration, what might you recommend as a protocol or structure for people who want to do like a slower psychedelic path? And how might that integrate with the slow burn traditions?
Well, I'll make a suggestion, but again, I want to emphasize that I'm not a clinician. I don't have a history of working with other people. I basically have made a self-conscious choice not to work with other people, but to be simply a solitary explorer, pushing my system hard, making basically a map of the dimensions that I entered into. But that doesn't give me a lot of experience working with other people, to answer your question. But basically, as I've read the literature and processed my own experience for spiritual awakening, I would recommend very low doses. Basically, spiritual awakening is about dissolving the glue that holds the ego in place, dissolving the structures that keep us fixed in these repetitive patterns of thoughts and emotions. And so you've got to kind of ferret out the ego where it lives in the world. And I think this is done well with low doses of LSD. Low doses of LSD combined with sustained meditative practice. Once in a while, doing more in order to challenge the boundaries of consciousness. But basically, if the goal is spiritual awakening, I think low doses of a psychedelic would be the way to go.
Cool. Awesome. Thank you for that. Something that was interesting that I think some people do get a sense of from their own journeys, whether or not they've had just a few over time, is there seems to be a kind of effect of having just the right amount of experience as they needed at the time in that journey. You experienced something similar in your journeys in your book. Could you tell us about like that sense of guidance?
Well, in all of my work, I always felt myself engaging and being engaged by a larger consciousness. This consciousness did not take concrete form. It never took personified form. It never took concretized form. And it changed, or the qualities of this consciousness changed the deeper I went, so that I began to understand, the way I think of it is, the consciousness that we enter into communion with in psychedelic states is an infinite consciousness that's capable of generating any number of different types of experiences or types of awareness within us. And our mind acts as a seed catalyst, a seed crystal that catalyzes a certain set of experiences from this infinite consciousness. If you do this repetitively, repeatedly, the experiences that you have and you integrate, internalize, and go through the various purification processes, it changes your consciousness, and therefore the consciousness that you take into the next encounter is a different consciousness that catalyzes a deeper set of experiences from the infinite potential of consciousness. And that means that what you experience as this guiding intelligence, this massive intelligence that you meet at different levels, is in a way a consciousness that arises at the intersection between your individual mind and this universal mind. And as you change, the intersection changes. So that, from my experience, the consciousness which I felt was always guiding my sessions was always invisible to me, but was always felt. It didn't adopt concrete form, or it very seldom adopt concrete form, because the form would change as the experiences deepens. So, that formless quality is, I think, something innate to do with the consciousness itself. And then, in going beyond the collective level of consciousness, beyond the collective psyche, and even beyond human history, when you're pushing so deep, you're going beyond Jung's category of archetypal consciousness, you're going beyond human history altogether. All of the interpretive frameworks, all the images, all the concepts that we associate with our religious and spiritual history, they just fall away. Basically, if several thousand years or 5,000 or 10,000 years of religious history just fall away, and you're moving into states of consciousness that go beyond any category of gods or deities or angelic beings, you're in a completely different world. So yes, always guidance, always an intelligence engaging me, but formless.
Yeah. Amazing. I have yet to get to that level in my particular journeys, but perhaps someday. I'd like to ask more specifically about sort of the forms that can appear, partly because I know from YouTube a lot of people are searching that. I can see the analytics. Entity encounters is a very popular and interesting point of conversation. And you mentioned, you explored a little bit more in the book, and you speak about how devotion is related to these entities. But let me ask this, like a guy I was speaking to at an integration circle in Victoria here not too long ago, he mentioned he had a mystical experience where he encountered none other than Ganesh, the elephant god of Hinduism. And when people have these encounters, they may ask a question that you asked in your journeys, which was, what is the meaning of what I experienced? So for after your journeys, how would you reflect on sort of the meaning of encountering, say, a particular form of a deity or something like that?
First of all, let me qualify. I don't consider my experiences normative, in any generalizable way. They are so many different medicines, so many different ways of using those medicines, and so many different personalities that are using the medicines to engage this infinite depth of consciousness, that it would be foolish to think that any one person, their experience would be a map or a chart for other people's experiences. So my position is to be very interested in other people's experiences in a very non-judgmental and supportive way. So whatever I say here, please take it in that context. When we experience realities that are beyond us, or consciousness, dimensions of consciousness that are beyond our own, and when we're tapping into those qualities that are like infinite compassion and infinite intelligence and infinite creativity, these are qualities that we tend to associate historically with various deities. And it's not surprising that our mind would put together the qualities of the phenomenology of the experience with the qualities of the deities, which we may or may have had exposure to intellectually. And sometimes we counter deities that that are not part of our own personal lineage and may not have been part of our, they may not have been something even that we knew about. It comes completely out of left field, and yet it bears the form of a culture's form of this deity, like Ganesh or Jesus or Mary or the Prophet Muhammad or something like that. So my understanding of it is that when you are working or when you are engaging entities or forms that have this quality of an entity that is identifiable in our historical traditions, my sense is that we are engaging a collective thought form or a spiritual being that is wearing the clothes of a collective thought form. And by collective thought form, I mean, if you have millions and millions of devotees that meditate and pray and offer devotions to a particular deity form which has been identified in their scripture, which is painted in their culture, statuary is all of this form. If you have millions and millions and millions of beings over thousands of years in devotional attachment to these forms or devotional focus on these forms, I think it creates a certain structure in the collective psyche, a collective thought form. And I don't minimize those forms. I think they're extraordinarily powerful, including secular thought forms like greed, power, anger. Those are, very powerful in our system. So when we encounter the deity or a deity in a particular form, we are either encountering a spiritual principle which is beyond form, which is wearing the form of this collective garment, or we're experiencing the collective garment straight out in itself. Either way, the collective psyche is implicated. The collective psyche is part of our experience, which is all perfectly normal and perfectly well and good, I think. At the same time, I would hold out that it is possible to go beyond all collective thought forms and to go beyond human history in one's experience. And when one does, those forms tend to fade away. I know there's a lot of discussion of entities because particularly DMT and DMT derivatives often expose people to entities. And I'm not suggesting that those entities aren't real or the entities don't exist. But to me, personally, and again, limitations, but personally, those entities reflect different levels of reality that as you go deeper, those levels, that kind of granular quality of lots of individual beings tends to yield to levels of reality which are less granular, fewer individual beings kind of constituting the population of those levels of reality and opening up into vast tracts of consciousness which are less individual, less entity-like. At least it is in my experience.
Got it. Awesome. Totally. Yeah, that definitely seems to resonate in terms of it being sort of a matter of levels. And after seeing sort of where you go in those levels, it makes a lot more sense that at some point even those dissolve and become something different. So speaking of levels, you mentioned that there's sort of a transition that you make and relatively quickly. I think you said 2 years, which for a young person, maybe that's a lot. And that one of the transitions that happens is a sense of the journey sort of being about yourself to be about the individual to being about the collective. And you speak about, well, I'll let you speak about it. And part of that transition, certain things became obvious to you. And one of those being the sort of fact of reincarnation and past lives. And I'm curious, could you let us know sort of what the different levels were and how your experience changed as you went up or deeper into them?
All right, those are sort of two questions rolled into one. So let me take the one on reincarnation first, and then bring me back. If I don't come back to the first question, bring me back to it.
Got it.
When I finished graduate school and was beginning my academic life, two people's work changed my life. One was Stan Grof, and that's what we're talking about today. The other person whose work changed my life was Ian Stevenson, professor at the University of Virginia, who is the Charles Darwin of reincarnation. He basically has generated the data. He's tracked down the data. Small children who have spontaneous recall of their former lives in sufficient detail and that we can basically exclude natural or physical explanations for how they would have these memories. And he's done this in book after book after book. So Stevenson convinced me that reincarnation was a fact of life. And he convinced me before I was really very deeply involved in my psychedelic work. But that concept was affirmed and expounded and deepened as my psychedelic work deepened. So it was already part of my intellectual furniture, but I began to understand it more and more deeply as we went. Now, in terms of levels, again, I was working at very high dose levels, so you can count it in terms of years or you can count it in terms of sessions. It took me about 10 sessions to go through what Stan calls the perinatal level of consciousness, which is that level of consciousness which is right at the interface between personal consciousness and transpersonal consciousness. Where they overlap is this level which is at the one hand the basement of the personal psyche and the doorway into spiritual reality. So that one goes through many experiences of death, experiences of sometimes reliving your own birth, confronting all your anxiety about whether there's anything good in reality beyond physical existence, tremendous existential pain, quandary, and eventually this culminates in ego death. And so the ego is shattered and you're transcended, you move into levels of consciousness that go considerably beyond anything that could be explained in terms of your personal history. It was at that point when I was expecting actually to be granted more comfortable access to spiritual reality. What I found was that the entire death rebirth cycle repeated itself again, but this time at a completely different level. I began to have tremendous collective experiences, experiencing collective rage, collective anguish. This went on for another 2 years and another 10 or so sessions, to another 12 sessions. In the beginning, I thought this was simply another variation, a deepening of ego death. I was still thinking in terms of a personal model. I thought that somehow this collective ego death, this collective death represented a deepening of my personal death. But in time, it went on for so long and it lasted the content of the experiences was so inherently collective that eventually I came to a different conclusion. And that is, the conclusion I came to is that the patient in these sessions wasn't me personally, but in some way the patient had become my human family, the collective species of humanity, and that I was being drawn into collective coexistems that held the pain and suffering of human history. That just as my individual psyche collects my individual trauma in coexistems, the memory of our species collects its collective trauma in these vast collective coexistems that I call them metamatrices. So that eventually, what I came to understand, took me a long time because this was so paradigm breaking and it was so foreign to, and it sounded so arrogant that somehow something I was doing in my sessions was somehow impacting the psyche of humanity. I mean, my God, that just looks like megalomania. But it's not that. It's simply following the natural course of the deepening of the death rebirth cycle, so that it churns at the personal level. And in my case, then it churned at the collective level for another 2 years. And eventually it culminated in this orgy of pain and suffering, of the ocean of suffering. And then it spun me into archetypal reality. And the ocean of suffering never returned after that point. It just stopped. There were still very intense purification processes to come, but this particular quality of this collective ordeal stopped, and I went into a whole nother cycle of death and rebirth. So yeah, that's basically the driving force behind my book, Dark Night, Early Dawn, is basically to understand the relationship, or why these collective experiences were showing up in my therapy when I thought I was individual therapy. What were all these people doing in my therapy? Turns out it wasn't that at all.
Yeah. Right. That's funny. Oh, and also for people who don't know, coexistem is termed from Stan Grof and is sort of the collection of biographical traumas going down to perinatal traumas around birth, and then going deeper into the transpersonal. And that stack of that pattern stack with a similar feeling tone is a coex. So then the metacoex is interesting concept.
Coexistem, thank you for the clarification. A system of condensed experience, an aggregate that's compiled of many experiences and memories and fantasies around a particular theme, in the individual. So a metamatrices suggests that the same dynamic happens at the collective level. Yeah.
Got it. Do you relate that to the idea of ancestral healing, or maybe that's different actually than sort of like family trauma?
Interesting. Variations on a theme, aren't they? Both of them are trans-individual. Ancestral still is working within the lineage of the individual, some type of biographical lineage.
Right.
Whereas I tend to focus, I haven't done a lot of work with ancestors in the work that I've done, so I don't want to presume to be able to speak on that area. For me, very quickly, I go into the soul reality, and the soul, of course, jumps historical lineages all over the place. The soul is, we've been every race, we've been every culture, we've been every occupation that's available through history. So to me, it broadens out very quickly into the human story, the human family. But other people have had an experience of working with their personal trauma, ancestral trauma, in that kind of directed linear fashion. And so, I think there should be some relationship between what I experience as these metamatrices of human trauma and what other people experience as ancestral trauma, gatherings at an ancestral level.
Yeah, I wonder if maybe the difference is, so the soul, capital S soul, being the collection of your the experiences of your awareness across all your past reincarnated lifetimes. I wonder if maybe it speaks to a differentiation between like biological trauma and passed down, also socially passed down from parent to child. Maybe that's sort of where that comes from, and then the soul is like a different thing. I don't know. Does that resonate with you potentially? Or?
It does, and I think one day we will understand this much more. I mean, we basically are right at the edge. We're collecting the phenomenology, the experiences, but actually interpreting this new complex of experiences is going to take some time. Yeah.
Got it. Totally. Right. Interesting question. So you mentioned the species mind and coming into this ocean of suffering, of collective pain. Where do animals fit into this?
Yeah. Well, of course, many psychedelicists have very powerful experiences with animal species, with the various totems of various species. They have powerful experiences of the planet filled with the minds of these species, not just the individual species, but the minds of these species and aggregates of mammalian mind and so on and so forth. That hasn't been the thrust of my experience. The thrust of my experience has really been working with human consciousness. But the nature of my experience of human consciousness completely opens me to the reality of animal consciousness in all sorts of different forms. I think the reason I've been focused on human consciousness, for reasons not of my choosing, just kind of being driven at a deeper level, is that humanity represents the greatest danger to life on this planet. We are the life destroyers. We are the driving force of the sixth extinction. If we can heal humanity, then all the other animals, all the other mammals and life forms on the planet will be safe. And that has been the focus of my work. Seems to have been locally focused on that human story. Other people have been retrieving the consciousness story of other life forms, even rock life forms and insect life forms and animal life forms, bird, fish life forms. Absolutely important work, essential work. It just hasn't been my personal work. Yeah.
Got it. Yeah, it's very interesting. And maybe it's that I've read this book, Levels of Energy by David Hawkins. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but basic point is he uses a method to, in his framework, identify a number to the level of consciousness or the level of energy of a being or an object or a mineral or whatever. And interesting enough, like a bacteria lands on the scale somewhere. They're very low, like 3 or something. I don't know. I don't know what might come first, is the acknowledgement of the consciousness of, say, animals and working our way down, or the acknowledgement of, say, consciousness above us. But it seems either way, it's sort of they make the other aware, something like that.
Let's imagine that there are as many levels of consciousness as there are, quote, below us, simpler and simpler and simpler, moving all the way down through the evolutionary tree. Imagine that there are that many levels of consciousness above us, and that we're not in any way the top of the chain, but we're maybe somewhere in the midpoint of that chain.
Totally. And an image comes to mind of, I think you mentioned at the end of the book, of the idea that an ascension of us in consciousness is sort of like a pulling down of something from a higher level. And I thought, oh, hey, how does that work for like our tissue cells? Like if they're sort of reliant on us in some way, and we're also reliant on them, and there's this like bottom up, top down relationship. Yeah. But so I'd love to ask you, speaking about levels again, I think we touched on breaking through to archetypal, what you call the best language that you could find being archetypal reality. And something you mentioned experiencing at that jump was a shift in your sense of the realness of everyday, ordinary life and ordinary states of consciousness. I'm curious, did your sense of reality change continuously? Did it change in certain jumps, or maybe just at one jump? And how did your sense of reality shift?
My sense of reality changed repeatedly at different levels. When everything was said and done, when I was processing all the experiences and trying to organize them in some form to present them and share them with other people, I differentiated 5 different levels, core levels of consciousness: personal mind, collective mind, archetypal mind, causal oneness, so the causal mind, and then diamond luminosity. Overlapping levels, and it's somewhat arbitrary where you draw the lines, but basically those divisions, so that the jump from personal consciousness into collective reality was a significant jump into, it's like, this is how reality is organized at a higher altitude, right? And then when that culminated and I was spun into reality, into what I called archetypal reality, this was a quantum step into a still deeper modality of consciousness. And in this, one of the striking features was I repeatedly had the sense over this next year and a half of work that I had entered a reality that was more real than time and space. And I was dealing with phenomena that were more real than my personal existence inside time and space, or even time space itself. And this, of course, touches on an ancient idea that we trace back to Plato, that there are structures, he called them archetypes, there are structures that create and inform time-space reality, all right? And he conceived these structures as eternal ideas in the mind of an eternal, unchanging ideas in the mind of an eternal deity, an eternal divine principle. That's not how I experienced them. I experienced them as living entities, as moving in time, but on a completely different scale of time. So an analogy that came up in my sessions, if you think of the Earth spinning around real quickly and then spinning around the sun pretty quickly, but then you look at that in the context of the galaxy, which is moving incredibly slowly, but vast, it's always moving. And inside you have the sun moving. It's kind of like that. Archetypal reality, these archetypal beings, to the extent that I was able to experience them clearly at all, were vast living structures on a completely different order of causality and a different order of time. I could not wrap my mind around them. I could not see them cognitively coherently. I experienced this enormous living intelligences, and the best my mind could do to give them some type of representation was to see them as galaxies. So we've all looked at the Hubble telescopes, we've all looked at these galaxies, we've seen the pictures. If we really sit with them and meditate them, we understand more deeply what we're looking at. And these things are billions of light years across, containing billions and billions of stars and so on and so forth. That's what my mind did just to frame this experience in some way. But I could not penetrate beyond that. They were just too big and too foreign to me to give them form. At a lower level of archetypal reality, I entered what I would call sort of a Jungian level of archetypal reality, where I experienced repeatedly the human psyche and the human species as a single organism, a single integrated organism. And I experienced networks, physical and mental networks, connecting this organism, kind of like the neurology of this organism. And I was shown repeatedly how the individual is hardwired and softwired into this matrix of consciousness of the species mind. And the species mind, how it informs our individual consciousness, and how our individual consciousness reaches out and informs and structures future species consciousness. So I saw things like each one of us carry a holographic fractal piece of the diseases of our time, of the mental diseases, of the physical diseases. And as we heal ourselves of these mental and physical diseases, we actually contribute to the healing of the collective psyche. So the collective psyche, in a sense, you would say it's more real than the individual psyche, but I would give it maybe a little different vocabulary. The individual is real, the collective is real. They have different kind of scales of their reality, and they are mutually implicated in each other. And both of these are transcended by the Platonic archetypal levels of reality, which are radically beyond our human collective psyche. Yeah.
Perfectly understood.
From that point on, from archetypal reality and beyond, everything was about going into deeper and deeper levels of what is real in the world. And we're not used to thinking of physical reality being on surface real, and that there are structures that are more deeply real. But I think that quantum theory is comfortable with that. String theorists are comfortable with that. We should be able to be comfortable with that in psychology.
Got it. Yeah. I was just going to say, perfectly understood, can visualize it perfectly, understand completely.
Yeah.
But there's something really intuitive about it that resonates. And actually, people do have experiences of a sense of degree of reality sometimes. So just sticking to the reality point just for a minute.
Yeah.
There's, I don't know if you've ever heard of this, but there's this condition called depersonalization derealization disorder. Now, as a disorder, it's relatively rare, but the experience of derealization is something that I think something like upwards more than 50% of people at some point in their life experience at least a moment or something of derealization. That DPDR, the acronym, is of course like a DSM mental illness. There's also the condition schizophrenia, which has some kind of interesting relationship to mystical visions that Carl Jung noted, and at least psychedelics themselves can induce or worsen schizophrenic symptoms, and the visions that people might have in schizophrenia can overlap with sort of the visions people might have with psychedelic stuff. So there's a connection there there's some kind of connection there. I'm just curious if your sense of, just bouncing off those, if your sense of mental illness has changed after your journeys.
Boy, that's a complicated topic, isn't it? And better answered by someone with psychedelic experience who is a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist who has much more training than I do in pathology and our psychological makeup. It has changed some. Was it Houston Smith who said, a mystic learns to swim in waters that the psychotic drowns in?
I think that was Joseph Campbell, I believe. Yeah.
So what we have in common is opening up into a reality that is beyond the private reality or the personal reality. We open up to a larger expanse of reality, which can be very destructive if you're not ready for it. It can be very injurious. It can be very traumatic. It can be very tumultuous. It can churn things up inside of you, just opening up to collective dimensions. And that's why I really, like all psychedelic therapists, I emphasize the importance of accessing these dimensions in very carefully controlled circumstances with therapeutic support, when you go into them. And this is work that's not advisable for a wide range of people. I mean, this is not necessarily, it's not universally safe. It really depends upon a lot of variables. There are screening criteria which have been developed to help screen people who are good candidates for working with psychedelics and those who aren't. Nothing unusual here. It's just part of the regimen. I'm less interested in trying to refine my understanding of disease and pathology, other than in very broad senses, understanding that people can be having legitimate access to transpersonal reality but in a way which is fractures or injures their ability to function in the ordinary world. What I'm more interested in is differentiating those confusions, those kind of lower level confusions between individual experience and these larger planes of reality, from those breakthroughs where we begin to enter these larger horizons, but either because our original equipment was sufficiently strong or because our methodology is sufficiently rigorous and focused, we don't experience it as traumatic. We don't experience it as confusing. We experience it as clarifying, and not the clarifying of an illusion or a delusion, but truly, truly metaphysically clarifying, so that these become great spiritual and philosophical initiations into the deeper fabric of reality. The sensation of that experience, I think, is very different than the kind of tumultuous confusion that can be generated in a pathological context. Yeah.
Got it. Totally. Yeah. And yeah, when you get to the collective level, then it becomes something very different. So thank you for that. You mentioned the sort of 5 levels that you lay out, that there's the personal, the collective, the archetypal, the causal oneness, and the diamond luminosity.
Yeah.
Just curious if you could take us up through to those levels. I know in another interview you said you hate that question because it's so challenging to talk about.
Yeah.
I won't press you too hard.
We'll just bump it up. We've gone into archetype reality. We've touched on the collective dimension. And in my experience, what happened was, after about a year and a half, which is 11, 12 sessions, not very much time. I mean, it really wasn't a lot of time, because this is a reality. Archetypal reality is so vast, it's so huge, that I basically kind of went through it very quickly, not experiencing the breadth of it, but just penetrating through it pretty quickly. And then going through yet another death and rebirth, kind of dying out of the greater real into an even greater real, this letting go of another level of set of assumptions. And entering into a year of tremendously powerful experiences, which I kind of grouped together into this category of causal oneness, because that when you first enter transpersonal states of awareness, or first enter spiritual levels of reality, our experiences there are highly conditioned by our time-space experience, so that in time and space, we all exist as separate individuals. So when you move into spiritual reality, you often tend to experience spiritual reality as composed of separate individuals, but they're without a body. But they have that granular quality of individual psyches, or individual souls, or individual entities. If you go deeper into, from psychic level to subtle level of reality, using Stan Groff's categories, the units of consciousness become larger. You're still in levels of consciousness which are dualistic, in the sense there's more than one of you present, but the entities are become increasingly large, so that it becomes species consciousness, or earth consciousness, or angelic realms. They become just very, very large. So you move from a level of consciousness that's just highly conditioned by time-space consciousness into a deeper level of consciousness which is less conditioned by time-space consciousness. And then when you move into causal level reality, the distinctive quality of that is that the entire universe is experienced as a single organism. Now, oneness is a core truth, of course, and it manifests at many different levels. I don't mean to over differentiate, these levels and suggest that it's literally climbing a ladder of consciousness. But my experience is basically unfolded in this kind of fashion. When you experience the world as one, it's not like intuiting the oneness of life, though that's part of it. But you literally dissolve into the universe as it appears to be experiencing itself. And as the universe experiences itself at that level, there are no separate objects. There are gradations and differentiations, but all of those are taking place within the tapestry, within the matrix of oneness. And that's what I mean by causal oneness, that I entered into a reality that I experienced as being, in some ways, beyond the archetype, beyond those divisions, in which I experienced the world as a seamless fabric of reality, and all other realities, star realities, galaxy realities, personal consciousness realities, collective psyche realities, all took place as organs within this larger oneness. In that context, I had deep experiences of what the Buddhists call shunyata, emptiness of form, transparency, where the experience, the way it's put in Buddhist scriptures, the Buddha awoke, in his meditation and saw a self, no self in himself and no self anywhere in the world. So the way we usually experience the world is composed of separate entities, and we are one of those entities. But when you experience the world in the causal perspective, you don't experience yourself as a separate self, and you don't experience a separate self anywhere in the world. Now, what is the world if there's no separate self in it? No separate molecules, no separate trees, no separate life forms. It is a living, thriving singularity, a oneness, a one organism. So there were experiences of that. There were experiences of cosmic love. And love, of course, is, in a sense, the emotion of oneness. When we experience love, we are experiencing the emotional counterpart to the fact of oneness. Experiences of the void, the primal void out of which the universe arises in the Big Bang. And experiences for part of me at this period was the birth of the diamond soul, which was a long lesson in where reincarnation is taking humanity. Where is this singular consciousness taking this little bitty species on this little bitty planet in this little bitty solar system? That's what I mean by causal reality, the fundamental, a deep encounter with the oneness of life. And then for me, after about 1.5 years at that level, I went through yet another death rebirth process, which is, it's not ego death again. It's not collective ego death. It's a deeper layer of dying and being reborn. And I was brought into states of consciousness, which I experienced as being hyper crystal clear beyond imagination, just clear experiences of light. But I had known light, many times up to this point, but this was an exceptionally clear form of light, marked, just striking out. I know I'm saying the same word over and over again, but that was the quality. It's like my ordinary mind felt gauzy and shadowy compared to this. Even collective mind and even archetypal mind felt like shadows compared to this, which was clear beyond imagination. Over the next 4 years, I entered this state only 4 times. So in 26 sessions, I entered this reality only 4 times. In between those 4 sessions, lots of episodes of cleansing, lots of episodes of healing and purification. Because if you're going to maintain clear cognition at these deeper levels of consciousness, You must go through a purification process that allows your entire system to acclimate to the levels of energy and the levels of reality that you're entering. And so it's just a natural course that I've discovered that every time I entered into a deeper level of reality, I was entering into a higher level of energy. And so I had to go through this purification process. Otherwise, my experience at this new level would not be clear. I would not be able to remember my experiences clearly. And you literally have to train yourself. I know this is a little off the point, but you have to train yourself to maintain cognitive coherence in these deeper levels of reality. Otherwise, you may get glancing insights or, short glimpses here and there, short touches. But your mind, in order to truly stay at this reality for hours and hours at a time, you have to go through this deep transformational process. So for me, I went into the diamond luminosity and went deeper into it for 2 of these 4 sessions. And then things changed. I had a particular experience, and from that point on, things changed. I wasn't going deeper into diamond luminosity. The diamond luminosity was crunching itself more and more deeply into my physical body, into my mental body, into my psychological and emotional body. And then I had one last, what I consider one of the last big visions of my entire journey. And then it was wrapped up. 2 more sessions, the universe just kind of wrapped it up and said, sayonara, see you. So.
Wow, amazing. And the breath of life, the expansion, the contraction, you see that in your journey. It's everywhere. And one of the 2 thoughts, one of the striking things that I took away from the book personally was the shift in understanding of ineffability, and that different levels being hard to find language for it is a matter of stabilizing and familiarity, and not necessarily a complete inherent lack of understanding that. So that's one takeaway. And then the other one, maybe even a bigger one, I just opened up the page to the book here, where you mention it, is one small little section called Beyond the Diamond Luminosity. And the humor of the failure of language, going from clarity beyond clarity to all capitals, hyper clarity, and beyond the light of all light, better than, or more light than the other light, going to absolute light. And you're understanding that this points to there being more than just there being like infinite number of levels potentially, as being the takeaway from that.
Let me say something about that, because that did represent a major turning point for me. So setting the stage, I'm now 15 years into this journey. I've gone through the ocean of suffering. I've gone through ego death. I've gone through archetypal reality. I've gone through lots of experiences of causal love reality. And then I get dropped into this communion with this infinitely satisfying, clear diamond luminosity, what Buddhism calls Dharmakaya, the clear light of absolute reality. So I get back into that the second time, which is the 50th session. The second time I'm in that reality, I'm as deep into the universe as I've ever been before. I couldn't ask for anything more than I was being given at the time. And all of a sudden, my visual field pivoted 90 degrees, and I saw reality far, far in the distance. Again, it looked kind of like galaxies. And out of that reality, a beam of light came and hit me, and it absolutely shattered me. It was a more powerful light than even the diamond luminosity that had become my ultimate reality. And just in that 1 second, it completely changed my understanding of reality, in that I had adopted the belief from multiple sources that there was an endpoint to this work. You know, you want to get to the goal. You do this, become one with God, or to dissolve into the void, the primal void of all existence. And I had become one with God in many different variations, and I had entered the primal void, but I still had this sense that there was an endpoint to this journey, and I was pushing so hard to get to the endpoint. I don't know what I was expecting to be waiting for me at the end point, but I knew it was going to be good. And what this session showed me was that it is an infinite universe. I'll never get to the end of it. It's just too vast, too huge. And it's 50 sessions in, 50 high dose sessions in, and I was shown this glimpse of a reality far, far beyond anything that I would reach in this lifetime. And at that point, I let go completely of the idea of reaching a deeper or an endpoint reality. And it changed into trying to absorb the reality that I was being opened into as deeply as I could into my personal being. So yeah, that was a major turning point. And that's one of the reasons I would, if I were doing this over again, I would be gentler with myself, because one of the reasons I was pushing so hard was because I had adopted a false belief that there is an endpoint. Now, I should be careful. There are homecomings. You go through experiences of coming home, and there's a tremendous sense of return and tremendous sense of ecstasy and joy of homecoming. But even those, I don't think they are not ultimate. At least they're not in my experience. They are markers on a longer journey, and that's why I would be gentler. I'd have a different orientation for what the purpose or what the value of these exercises are.
Totally. Totally. And I think my shift in understanding through the book too, also that one paragraph changed everything for me in a similar way. I thought, yeah, I want to reach the endpoint too. And then that changed that. So I guess following that thread, coming back down the mountain as you've gone through these experiences, you had a vision of the future and of what may be coming in the future. And could you tell us about what that was like, what that looked like, and how that's evolved for you since? I know since you published the book, the COVID pandemic happened.
Yeah. Well, this is not so much coming down the mountain, but still climbing the mountain. It actually started when I was in the end stages of the Ocean of Suffering work, when I was in the chapter, The Initiation in the Universe. I started being given visionary initiations into the human story and the stages of human evolution, and in particular, the story that I was being initiated into was the story that humanity was coming to a turning point in its evolutionary development. It was coming to a major transformative pivot that would change the nature of life on this planet. And I just had a series of visions over 4 years in the early to mid 1990s of what I call the visions of awakening. Was that there was an historical process that was trying to awaken not just individuals, it was trying to awaken the entire species. That was the historical work at hand, a transformation that was truly collective. A transformation not simply of our psychological well-being or some levels of psychological truth, but a transformation of the fundamental plate tectonics of the collective psyche. The archetypal structure of the deep psyche was in the process of undergoing a revision, a transition. So this, for 4 years, these visions kept coming into me, and this completely surprised me because, again, I was at the tail end of thinking my work was about personal transformation, and yet these visions were consistently about collective transformation. Nowhere was I shown how nature was going to pull off this transformation. Nature or divine or whatever you think of as the driving force. How were we going to undergo this profound transition that I was being shown. And then in 1995, when I was in the middle of the diamond luminosity work, and I had entered the diamond luminosity twice, and had had that experience we just talked about. I'd done a year's worth of more purification, and I was expecting, given the rhythms of what had gone on before, I was expecting to be taken back into the diamond luminosity material again. But that's not what happened. What happened was, first I dissolved radically into the species mind. I'd gone into that territory before. I'd learned how to go through this process. So I dissolved into the mind of our species, and I ceased to function as Chris Bache. And I began to function in somehow, I know this sounds extreme, but in somehow I was functioning as the species of humanity. At some core level, I had become the human species. And then I was taken deep into deep time. I'd gone into deep time many times previously. This took me deeper into deep time than I had gone before. And basically, in that session, I experienced the death and rebirth of humanity. I experienced a global crisis that we were coming into, and I experienced it as the species will experience it. It didn't give me the details. It didn't tell me when, where, how exactly. It showed me the fact of this crisis. It showed me that we would make it through this crisis, and it gave me certain key insights in of the mechanisms of transformation that were involved in this crisis. But basically, what I experienced in this session was humanity coming to a turning point in its history, and a profound unraveling, a deep deconstruction of reality as we had known it, an undoing of all the assumptions that we were making. It seemed as if this was a global systems crisis that was being driven by a series of ecological crises. At the time, I should say, this is 25 years ago, right? I knew next to nothing about the global systems crisis. I didn't know about ecological crises. I was totally naive about these things. But what I experienced was humanity came to a point where we basically lost control of our lives. We were not able to control the reality of our lives. We basically were on an extinction trajectory. And just when it reached its peak, we went through a threshold, and the danger began to subside, and we began to, as it were, pick ourselves up on the other side of this decades-long series of crises. And when we picked ourselves up, and when we began to reorganize ourselves after this crisis, we found that we had been profoundly and deeply and permanently changed by this crisis. We were changed at the core level of our essential psyche, of our collective psyche. This crisis opened up our heart to one another and opened up our mind to the universe in a way that was collectively unprecedented. And as we began to interact in this post-crisis reality, there was a synergistic feeding off of patterns and trends, and feeding back and forth, all circulating around new values, new perceptions of the good, new understandings of life, new understandings of ourselves, new understandings of the universe, new capacities that were opening within the human heart and the human mind. Then in the 70th session, what I refer to as this last visionary experience, I was taken deeper into deep time and given one last coda on this trajectory. But the net result of all of this is that I came to see, or what I was being shown, was that humanity was in the process of giving birth to its next evolutionary form, to the next higher form of being a human being. And if you ask, what is the form of the future human? What will the future human look like? I think the key is understanding reincarnation. This refers to another series of lessons that I was given, where I was shown experientially, personally and experientially, where reincarnation is taking humanity. Where are we going? And this was different than the Eastern traditions that I had assimilated in graduate school. That vision is you grow and you grow and you grow and you change. You achieve some type of spiritual breakthrough to your individual essence. Atman is Brahman. We are divine. And when you have that spiritual breakthrough, you achieve what the Hindus call moksha, escape, which means you escape samsara. You no longer have to be incarnated. You achieve realization, you achieve enlightenment, and then you enter parinirvana. You leave the physical universe behind. What was paramount in my sessions was not that. It was the vision that we grow and we grow and we change, and we grow and hopefully more compassionate, more understanding, more talent, so on and so forth. But there comes a time, the way I understand reincarnation, we die, we expand to our soul consciousness, we make a choice to incarnate, we contract into egoic consciousness, we expand into soul consciousness, come back into egoic consciousness, and we've been doing this for tens of thousands, possibly hundreds of thousands of years. And if we do that, sooner or later, soul consciousness wakes up inside individual historical consciousness. So that my experience was, I had an experience where at a critical point in one journey, all of my former lives started to come back into me. And I had done, past life therapy. I knew a dozen or so of my former lives in detail, but all of my former lives started to come back into me. And at one particular point, they seemed to reach a critical mass, and there was an explosion of energy. And this energy fused all those individual lives into a single consciousness. And I was catapulted into a state of consciousness that was individual, but a form of individuality beyond anything that I had ever understood. And I think that's what's happening to us on this planet. We have been gestating the future human for thousands and thousands of years. We are about to give birth to that future human in history, in this century, I believe. Gestation is long. Birth is very short, traumatic. I think that we're entering a time of history which is going to be traumatic. It's going to be very painful. It's going to be very difficult, the way labor is difficult. But I believe, based only on my psychedelic experience, that we do make it through, and we are deeply changed in the process, and we grow up. We grow up into our next evolutionary form, the future human. And on those few occasions in my sessions when I was allowed to experience the future human, they were deeply and profoundly ecstatic experiences, just totally humbling, and just a radically transformed humanity coming out of this process. And I think that this chapter, The Birth of the Future Human, in the book, is the most important chapter in the book, because if it's true, it concerns your children, my children, our grandchildren's grandchildren. It concerns all of us, what's happening at a very, very deep level. And it also helped me understand some of the historical currents that were taking place. In this context, COVID is, to me, it's like a little shot across the bow. It's like a little overture. It's not the real symphony. It's just the overture to the symphony. It's a taste of how vulnerable we are to deep and profound disruption, and how quickly the entire structure of our society can pivot. That's what we should be learning from COVID, and our interdependence, and how much we have to work together to rise to the challenge that's coming at us. The challenges will be much deeper than COVID, and much longer lasting and much more serious and life-threatening, I think. Yeah.
Thank you. Yeah. The vision was very powerful. And I didn't have the vision. I can't speak to it directly, but there are obviously signs of that happening, ecological signs. And I know there's tons of literature on systems crisis and vulnerability, and we see that financially, that's for sure. We've seen that play out. Yeah. When COVID happened, one of the things we saw here in Canada was just toilet paper ran out. Everyone was doing the rush for toilet paper. A little hint at what can happen, right? How quickly it can happen. And what comes to mind is I think it's a Chinese proverb. I don't know. Maybe Einstein said it. Maybe it was something like, society will be good, or the world will be happy when people are willing to plant trees that will only be seen by the next generation. So the idea that it seemed so intuitive, something clicked when he said about the souls fusing together, about being able to understand and see that we'll have reincarnations in the future. And so we'll actually be on this planet when we die again. So something very intuitive
total
about
change,
that.
Isn't it? The Native American traditions of making your decisions based upon how they impact 7 generations, recognizing that we will be those generations. So the earth we leave is the earth we inherit. And it broadens our sense of responsibility. And Dwayne Elson says this is basically, we have to move from being a species stuck at the adolescent level to the mature adult level. And when you're at the mature adult level, you look at the broader impact across society and through history of the decisions and the choices that you're making. And my sense is we no longer can afford to try to run this planet based on egoic consciousness. The culture that we have created, the history that we have lived, is a history that has been created by the ego. Now, I know the ego gets a bad rap in spiritual traditions, and I think the ego is beautiful. To me, it's an exquisitely beautiful structure of consciousness, but it's fundamentally isolated. It doesn't really experience the deeper fabric of our connective tissue. We can no longer afford to run this planet have this planet run by human beings who are operating only out of an egoic level of consciousness, because that inevitably creates push-pull, that creates wars, it creates upper classes and lower classes, those who have and those who don't, the privileged and the unprivileged. We need to grow up, and we need to basically grow up into our soul consciousness, knowing that now our soul, we have experienced lives as all the races on the planet, all the nations on the planet, all the classes on the planet. All of those are alive within us and making our choices out of that level of consciousness. Yeah.
I can only imagine what that would be like. So I've got something for you, Chris. I've got a gift for you. Because that when you share the vision in the book, I'll just read it. You say, I saw the future human standing up, and this seemed significant. Against a background of many seated Buddhas, this being was standing upright. So you mentioned that your form of art is writing. And that's beautiful. Some people, they use visual art like Carl Jung for visualizing their visions. Well, one tool that we have available to us now is the tool of AI art, where you can put in prompts and receive images and things. So I've just emailed to you just right now. I just hit send an AI art image I generated of that image as best as I could represent it.
I see it. Yeah, I see it. That's beautiful. That's beautiful. Yeah. So my sense is that in history, we've hit basically the meditating Buddha or any meditating being in an awakened condition gets quiet on the outside in order to still the mind, so the mind can penetrate through the layers and touch the deeper sense of reality. And a standing Buddha is someone who incorporates the clarity of that sitting posture, but the dynamism of standing and walking and acting. And I think that's where we're going. It's not about simply a waking up. It's a waking up and acting on that awakened consciousness and bring it forward. Thank you for that image. That's really beautiful. Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah. It's a very large scaled one, so feel free to do whatever you want with it.
Yeah.
Thank you. Awesome. So, awesome. So we're shifting more. So I've got some specific things I want to ask you about too.
Yeah,
and
sure.
I'm glad that we've covered all this so far, because now it contextualizes it. I'm very interested in, I love that it's sort of bringing back those concepts and experiences back down to here and now, like on Earth at this level of consciousness and operating here. And some of the things that we contend with here are the reality of needing to operate in the world, that we have sort of traditions from the past that we have handed down to us. And we're just born in this life, and we see that there are religions that we can, certain paths that we can follow, and there are certain deities that can be worshipped, and there are many choices in how to navigate this world. And that's been a very strong question for me personally, at least. And how do I want to walk in life? Now, I guess maybe the first question is: so how has your understanding of God and religion changed through your journeys, and how might that relate to the lack of one ultimate level and meta coexistence?
That's a big question.
Yeah.
For that question, I need to drink some water.
Yeah.
Well, I was a religious studies professor, and I started, my first vocation in life was I wanted to be a Catholic priest. I was raised in the Roman Catholic tradition, and I was in the seminary for 4 years. And the Catholic tradition treated me well. I didn't get any trauma, and it was a good shake. And then I did my master's. I did a undergraduate degree in theology at Notre Dame, and then I did a master's in New Testament criticism at Cambridge, and then I did philosophy of religion at Brown. And by the time I finished graduate school, I had pretty much studied my way out of religion altogether. I kind of had recapitulated the transition from medieval theology in the Catholic tradition to the scriptural revelation, the scriptural revolution in Protestantism, to the scientific critique of religion in the modern mind. And basically, I finished as a pretty sophisticated agnostic with very high standards for any possibility of conceptualizing something beyond time and space, something approximating God's dimensions. So I had let go of concepts of God. Since I had studied not just one religious tradition, but I had studied multiple religious traditions, I began to understand the common threads, but also the differences in the world religions. And I also studied how religions came into existence. And they say that dogma is like sausage. You really don't want to see it made. And when you really watch how dogma is created historically, it's so filled with human errors and human foibles that you just don't want to eat that kind of stuff. So I had gone through that, and I pretty much had scrubbed my mind of all things having to do with theology and deities and things like that. And that was the mind that I started the psychedelic work. And what happened was, of course, the psychedelic work initiated me into the reality that was behind those concepts. And it took me into the spiritual reality that had given birth to these approximations through history. But it took me into it. On the one hand, it led me to affirm the reality of the deeper intelligence that lies behind physical existence. But it did not lead me to affirm any individual lineage of deity or teachers. And even collectively, the nature of my experience was to transcend even the collective religious enterprise, so that it drew me into the reality a reality of the divine which is so far beyond our historical attempts to conceptualize the divine in history that truly, we say I'm spiritual, not religious. That's a trope, I know, but it's kind of like that. I did not relate, and I do not relate in any devotional sense to any of the religions on the planet. While I respect them enormously and I understand them and I respect the polishing that they can give human nature, my psychedelic experiences took me in a world beyond that world. So on the one hand, I affirm a divine intelligence, while I don't like the word divine, and that's why I talk about the mind of the universe, because I'd rather speak in those categories than in theological categories, but that there is an extraordinary infinite intelligence and infinite compassion that gives birth to existence and that embodies that the physical universe is the body of this being, of this manifest being. And there might be other universes, and our universe is not necessarily the only universe in existence, but there are other universes with all the levels and complexities that ours has. So it's a complex answer, isn't it? On the one hand, it affirms a spiritual reality, it affirms divine reality, and I also don't feel inclined to narrow my love of this intelligence to any historical religious forms.
Got it. Very tough topic, 100%. And I definitely see the hesitation or not hesitation, the very clear sense of not wanting to start your own thing, Bacheism, the psychedelic path.
Oh, what a waste.
Not doing that. So it's interesting. One hand, people speak about the meaning crisis that we face in the West, that scientific materialism has sort of grasped hold, and we've completely wiped out any higher realms from our sense of reality. Yeah. And in the coming just challenges that we're going to face, if that culminates in a global crisis as you describe or otherwise, that we have to contend with the world and we need to navigate in the world, and a sense of meaning and purpose and self-understanding is part of that. Leading up to this future human, we have decisions and actions that we can take as individuals, and not everyone can walk the psychedelic path to necessarily realize these things themselves. How do you see people preparing themselves or moving forward in light of this understanding of the Great Awakening?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are living in a time of a crisis of meaning because the materialism of early science, not post-quantum science, but of early science, which still tends to dominate humanities and the social sciences, is a world that's stripped of meaning. It's a world that has no meaning. There is nothing beyond physical reality, and physical reality is seen as evolving by pure chance. So there's no existential significance. Your life has no meaning associated with it. There is no existential significance to the challenges that you may be facing psychologically or physically or socially. It's just pure random. Nature is blind. It's violent. And all my life, I've been working with students at university campuses, and that's the philosophy that they've been taught in all their other courses. That reality, to be real, you have to face the meaninglessness of existence, and then you push on from there. That is one of the great values of psychedelics, because psychedelics can pop that bubble. It doesn't take too long to pop that bubble. Give me one weekend a month for 1 year, and we can pretty much shatter that. So at least we can see that there is a reality that's behind the physical universe. We can experience to some degree the intelligence of design that is expressing itself in the creative manifestation of time and space and the structures in time and space. That's a very powerful breakthrough. I think that's one of the major contributions that psychedelics can make for us, is not simply healing us of our trauma and healing us of our wounds, but initiating us into this, on the one hand, ancient, and on the other hand, new worldview, that the world is alive, the world is saturated with intelligence, and there's layers and layers and layers of intelligence, and we can commune with this intelligence. We can download from this intelligence. We can, enter into it. Just to have this sense that there is a purpose to life, there is an intelligence expressing itself. That's one of the reasons why I think reincarnation is so important, because we have hard data that reincarnation is true, because we have those verified memories of our deep past, and that gives us a deeper understanding of what might be driving the things that we undertake in our lifetime, that there is a hidden purpose, a hidden project folded into the details of our life circumstance. This is just one of the things that comes very, very clear in past life therapy. By expansion, when we begin to see the purpose not only in our individual lives, but the purpose that's percolating inside our collective evolution, and the purpose that's behind biological evolution and the emergence of life, and the emergence of self-aware life, and so on and so forth, that gives us some grounds for beginning to hope that there is meaning behind this crisis that we're coming into, that this crisis is going to be terrible. I mean, it's going to be just terrible. We're not going to get through this easily. And I believe we will survive it, but we will not survive unchanged. We will be deeply changed by it. And to enter into this process with this belief that somehow it's all an accident and it has no meaning, it has no significance, is a terrible, terrible philosophy to take into what's coming. Now, having said that, the experience of the meaningfulness of existence, or the intelligence that runs throughout all of life, that doesn't mean necessarily that our first or second or third take on this intelligence is necessarily correct, because there's a sense in which just to touch the enormous scale of creation is a humbling experience, and it tends to lead you to hold on to your concepts lightly, delicately, because you know that your concepts are only small approximations of something which is much, much larger than your mind is going to wrap itself around. But just to have the experience that there is this power manifesting itself in life encourages us, I think, to live our life with deep integrity, to live our life with deep purpose, and to actualize the purpose of our incarnation as deeply as we can. My understanding is that before we incarnate, we choose our incarnation. And there's lots of research that suggests that. So my sense is that every one of us, every human being on the planet now, chose the incarnation that they are currently living, right? And if that's the case, then all we need to do is do the best we can with the incarnation that we are living, and the rest will take care of itself, right? And I think that's a pretty healthy way to engage what's coming at us, to do the very, very best we can and let the end results work themselves out.
Beautiful. And of course, immediately begs the question, what is the best that we can do?
Exactly.
Although there's something immediate about, we have things that immediately call us in our environment. So there's definitely something else to that. Okay, so I hear what you're saying about attaching ourselves to concepts lightly, and at the same time, with our practices, our spiritual practices, we may have a stronger hold on those as the process, maybe not attached to the meaning that we attribute to the end goal or things like that. I'd like to explore this a little bit more specifically too, and one of the ways that we can that we confront the world, comes to a basic principle, as far as I can understand it, is that where attention goes, energy flows, is the idea. You mentioned earlier that when we sort of worship or give praise to entities or say collective principles, that it can kind of give rise to those as images in the collective unconscious. And the way I understand worship is being it's like a practice of directing attention to the highest value, the highest good, some aim that you have, that, whether that's nirvana or whether that's creating the kingdom of God on earth in Christianity, or the Gnostic image of separating from the earth, sort of up and out image that the Gnostics had. What the worship does is it helps people sort of realign their values and their actions to maintain themselves as they walk on that spiritual path. And, certain concepts become devalued, and it sort of maintains a structure of reality with certain things having more importance than others. Big question, but how are we to worship in light of the diamond luminosity, and pun intended?
Well, I'll tell you how I worship. I worship the universe. I worship the diversity of life on the planet. I worship the manifestation of galaxies and solar systems and star systems. I worship the manifest abundance and the unfolding complexity of life itself. And I honor the hidden drivers of this reality. And, science is telling us, 95% is dark energy and dark matter, 96% is dark energy and dark matter, which we've never seen and we really don't understand. Only 4% is visible in any realistic form. So it's not that big a stretch to think that the universe is growing. It's an unfolding out of an extraordinarily complex and infinite reality. So I honor the universe as the manifest body of this intelligence. And I honor the intelligence which is manifesting as this body at the same time. So to me, the medieval cathedrals of Europe were created in order you walk into them, and the idea is they lift your eye to a higher horizon, to a deeper understanding. To me, spending time digesting the images that were given to us by the Hubble telescope and its successor, those are spiritual experiences. Those are profoundly rich spiritual meditations on the intelligence that's manifesting itself as our universe. And then for me, I reflect on my own experiences. I mean, I can't manifest the experiences that I've had inside my time-space body. I wish I could, but I can't manifest diamond luminosity in my daily consciousness. But I can remember, and I can meditate upon, and I can bring those experiences into my mind, and I can enter back into the edges of those experiences as part of a deepening of my own living process. Right? And I'm also deeply moved by other people's experiences of this infinite intelligence. So that's why I really enjoy reading other people's psychedelic experiences, because I don't want to get trapped simply in my lens, in my particular lens. I like to see this infinite mystery as it's experienced by many different people, because that enriches my sense of its complexity.
Wow. I think I wrote wow like 50 times in the book as I was going along. What comes back for me is coming back to the scientific materialism, and maybe an immediate thing that could happen is a softening of our concept of scientific materialism, and hopefully psychedelics can play a part in that. I do want to mention interesting, maybe coincidence, maybe it's not strong enough to be a synchronicity, but for me, reading your book, when you mentioned Carl Jung a few times, I thought, oh my God, no way. And then you specifically mentioned Carl Jung's The Red Book, which I'm in the middle of right now. which is crazy.
Yeah.
And then you mentioned Richard Tarnas a few times, and then you specifically said at one point he mapped out the history of the ideas of Western thought. Lo and behold, I'm in the middle of Richard Tarnas's The Passion of the Western Mind at the same time.
Wonderful book.
Very interesting book. And you realize just how immature, recent, let's say, scientific materialism is, like 300 years, something, scale of tens of thousands. So that was a funny coincidence for me. So if we can wrap it around, psychedelics are a tool, not necessarily for everyone. How could we best use psychedelics for spiritual awakening in light of the coming challenges that we may face?
Well, I hope we use them for more than spiritual awakening. I think, for example, the whole movement in the psychedelic renaissance towards healing is really important, because I think when I look at human beings, I don't simply see a human being. I tend to see souls. And so when I look at children, I don't see young beings. They could be very, very old beings in a young body. And when I see old beings, I don't necessarily see, old people. I don't see old beings. It could be a very young soul in an old body. And so I tend to look at the qualities of soul that are present in an incarnation. And my sense is at this particular time in history, people are incarnating with lots of former lives active in their current life. And they're incarnating with lots of unfinished business at the soul level alive in their life. There's a sense, and that means that healing is a very important contribution, not only to their individual well-being, but to our collective well-being. So my sense is that we are incarnating generations of pain and suffering in this generation, in these generations, and that by clearing this pain and suffering, we are clearing out the whole system of all the garbage of our left over from our egoic consciousness through thousands of years of incarnations, and we're opening up and creating space for this deeper infusion of cosmic consciousness to enter into our lives. So psychedelics can be a significant part of this healing. So that's the one. Second, if healing is allowed to deepen, then it becomes a tool of initiation into the intelligence of the universe, the intelligence that lies at the very core of our being. And psychedelics can help us experience, even if only temporarily, the truth of our divine nature and the truth of our inclusive nature, so that it really is like we are all leaves on a tree, and every leaf truly is part of my being. And only at the surface level does it look like we're separate leaves, but as a tree, we experience that we are all implicated in each other's lives. And so naturally compassion arises, fairness, justice arises out of that. So psychedelics can help us deepen and accelerate this process. A whole separate issue is the balancing of psychedelics with spiritual practice, which is non-psychedelic. That's a whole separate issue. I don't think psychedelics by themselves is necessarily a very wise way to proceed. You need the support and grounding and insights that have been kept alive in our spiritual traditions, our meditative traditions, and contemplative traditions, that I think these two work hand in hand well with each other. So I think those are maybe the most important. One is the accelerating of healing and the deepening of our insight into our true nature and into the nature of the universe. And then if we want to push farther, cosmological exploration just takes that one step farther into a conscious opening to layers of reality that lie beyond simply our physical senses. And I think you don't have to push it as far as I did to do a little bit of cosmological exploration, which can be very healthy and very supportive. I think I just pushed it so far, so hard. It becomes a life-defining project, and there's no need for it to become a life-defining project for many people. But I think psychedelics have multiple layers of benefit that they can give us at this time. They can help heal us, they can help us come to our spiritual senses, and they can help give us a sense of the deeper mystery that we're part of.
Got it. Beautiful. Yeah. I'd like to bring us back to just one little point I kind of skipped over, one little thought I want to ask you about. And just coming back to the understanding of there being infinite levels that are higher and higher and higher, or by Houston Smith's law of inverse analogy, deeper and deeper and deeper. How do we align ourselves with the highest if there is no highest?
Oh, yeah. Your question catches the paradox, doesn't catches the issue. Yeah. Let me give you this is going to sound a little off target, but I'll focus it in. I often think that the relationship of physical reality to spiritual reality can be modeled on an apple. And physical reality is the skin of the apple, right? So the entire physical world and all the levels is the skin of the apple. And if an apple starts and it's expanding, it's like the universe is expanding and getting bigger, the skin is getting bigger. But the meat of the apple is spiritual reality. And we have a tendency, because we think of psychedelics as mind expanding, mind opening, and there is a subjective sense that the reality that we're entering is bigger than our physical reality. That tends to convey a sense that spiritual reality is bigger than physical reality. But I don't think that's necessarily an insight that generates, when you go deeper and deeper, that sense of expansion into deeper space changes. So I'd like to give a different metaphor. If you go underneath physical reality, you get into a layer of spiritual reality. And if you go deeper, in a deeper layer of spiritual reality, you start to drive towards the center of the apple. And as you drive deeper towards the center of the apple, of course, forms fall away, because forms are part of the emergence of physical reality. And the light gets brighter and brighter and brighter as you drive to the center of the apple, because you're at the center is light, and light eventually manifests the green textures of the apple skin, but in the end, it's light. So you're asking the question now, how do we orient ourselves to the ultimate, even knowing that the ultimate is beyond our intellectual grasp, right? And I think the key to that is recognizing that the essence of my life and the essence of your life is fundamentally the same essence. We all come from the light. We are all fractal embodiments of the light. We are all evolving expressions of this manifesting intelligence, this self-manifesting intelligence. And at that very, very deep level, my essence is the same as the essence of mosquitoes and ants and leaves and everything on the planet. And that's why when I go into a transcendental state, that is, I drop into selflessness or shunyata, I experience the world as one. And as the shamans would shout out, all my relations, all other levels of reality, all other beings are my relations. We're all kin in this planet. Even though we may not be able to adequately conceptualize this essence, individual essence, the Atman, the Brahman, we can tune to it. We can know it. We can let it suffuse our being. We can we can let go of anything small which keeps us smaller than it, and we can regularly cultivate the practice of tuning to it. And that is only partly an intellectual exercise. It's deeper than an intellectual exercise. It's more of a tuning exercise. And that we can do even without having an adequate understanding of the final goal. It's just like, it's an enjoyment. There is a sense of peace. There is a sense of harmony. There is a sense of infinite challenge, and the challenge of infinity. But there's a profound sense of alignment that comes about in our person and in our relationships the closer we draw to that reality. And we can do all of that without having any solid answer to what is the nature of ultimate reality.
Got it. I mean, not really got it, but
yeah.
I'm glimpsing it. What comes to mind is the distinction between process-oriented, say, spiritual practice or religion, and then goal-oriented religion or spiritual practice. Mm-hmm. Is that useful there?
It can be. I mean, basically, one way of putting that, we can live in a world of nouns or we can live in a world of verbs. Verbs are more accurate than nouns, right? That's just one of the insights that science and philosophy gives us. So we live in a world of process rather than a world of objects, right? And it's all process. A human being is a process which begins, lives, and dies. You know, it goes, consciousness goes, evolves, and constantly changing. Neither you or I are the same at the end of our conversation as we were at the beginning. We've been changed by this contact. So it's all verbs. It's all process.
Yeah. And noting the time, maybe one more thing on this topic I'll just bring up. It's just this is what it comes back to, at least for me, is in certain scriptures, will pick Christianity. Jesus says, not one word will change in the scriptures until all is said and done. And other ones, Islam, worship no other God but me or whatever. This kind of exclusionary thing doesn't seem to just be like a cultural interpretation of it. It's like right there in the core of the revelation of the religion. I don't know. What do you make of that in 2 minutes?
I understand. I understand it. There was a time in our history, not that long ago, where religions existed basically on specific continents. They were just kind of, before the invention of the steam engine, religions existed in a valley, in a particular landscape. There wasn't mass migrations of populations moving around. The religion was part of a place. It was tied to a place. And when you bump up against other people in another place, there is a conflict between how your people see the reality and how those people see reality. And so the honoring the integrity of the vision was part of the process of the people owning their identity, in contrast to other people who have a different vision and a different identity. But of course, all of this changed with the invention of the steam engine, and then with the invention of travel, and then with the invention of the internet. Now everything's getting blended, and now, ever since the 19th century, scholars have been putting together these amalgams of gathering the world's wisdom together into these massive compendiums of trying to understand it all. We're wrapping our mind around the entire planet. In that context, I think what we recognize is that what may have been a virtue in the ancient past now can become an encumbrance. It can become a limitation. So now I think the greater wisdom is in understanding all of these religious traditions simultaneously, and understanding that the whole is greater than any of the individual parts. And so that the pattern of spirituality for the planet as a whole is a larger and more interesting story than the pattern of spirituality in one particular tradition versus another particular tradition. Okay. So it's just a different truth that comes forward in different historical circumstances. So on the one hand, I recognize the sentiment that you described, and I honor it as an historical sentiment, but I don't feel beholden to it. To me, the greater challenge has been to try to understand the world's diversity of religious beliefs and spiritual beliefs, and then to, in my particular case, to take the exploration so deep that it radically eclipses all of our human experience in a larger landscape that emerges in deep spiritual experience.
Wow. And just to wrap it up, I'll just add, I got a sense of that. The first thing I ever read that led me down this deepening the spiritual path was Joseph Campbell and him writing about exactly that, this global sense of all the world's traditions.
Yes.
So thank you, Chris. So much to meditate on.
Luke, it's been a pleasure. I thank you for the conversation. Thank you for giving me a lot of room to work and for your very thoughtful seeding of questions. I appreciate it.
Thank you. And I hope that this and other interviews will help you in digesting your own journeys and having the community finally to share your experiences with. So I feel part of the same community with you, and I'm excited to see what you put out in the future.
These conversations do help me. Sharing is good, and I hope they're useful to other people, but they truly help me too, because it helps me digest all these things.
Got it. Awesome. Thank you, Chris.